The forgotten ambush trick, so terrifying it was erased from every military manual. There are stories the history books don't want you to know. Devices so effective, so psychologically devastating, they weren't just banned, they were erased. Manuals burned, pages blacked out. Commanders swore their men to silence, and what's wild, the knowledge still exists, buried between the lines of old engineering notes and whispered through generations of survivalists. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because here on the Forgotten Warfronts, we don't just tell history, we uncover what it tried to hide. The trap that made the ground itself the enemy. During World War II, when guns were scarce and resistance fighters had nothing but their wits and the land beneath their boots, a new kind of weapon was born. It didn't fire bullets, it didn't explode, it simply waited. This was known among engineers as the Step Snare, a primitive yet genius trap that turned the ground itself into an ambush. The idea was brutally simple: use the human instinct to trust the earth underfoot against the enemy. Fighters dug shallow pits, covered them with thin lattices of bamboo or branches, and disguised them perfectly with leaves and soil. Beneath the fragile cover waited a single stake, fire-hardened, angled upward, often coated with oil to prevent decay. When a soldier stepped on it, the cover collapsed just enough to drive that stake into the leg or foot, immobilizing the victim instantly. It didn't kill. That was the point. A wounded man slowed down his entire squad. He screamed, he bled, and he demanded rescue. Suddenly, one man's pain became a unit's delay, and that delay was all the resistance needed to vanish into the woods. Why it terrified commanders more than any bomb. Here's the part that made commanders lose sleep. These traps didn't just wound, they haunted. Soldiers started second-guessing every step. A patch of dirt, a fallen leaf, a puddle, it could all be hiding something. That kind of paranoia breaks morale faster than bullets. Military researchers later called them psychological choke points. A single step snare could freeze an entire patrol. The terrain itself became the enemy, and the battlefield transformed into a silent chessboard where every move could be your last. By 1947, both Allied and Axis armies quietly scrubbed all mention of these devices from their field manuals. The term Step Snare disappeared from military vocabulary. What replaced it was silence, and the understanding that some knowledge, once released, couldn't be controlled. The real genius behind the design. The Step Snare wasn't about cruelty, it was about control. Its inventors, mostly guerrilla engineers and resistance fighters, used whatever nature offered: bamboo, moss, branches and patience. They studied how people moved through landscapes, how footsteps sounded on different terrain, and how to hide disturbance in the soil. That same understanding of movement and instinct became the backbone of modern fieldcraft and survivalism. The principle was simple, but powerful. People follow the path of least resistance. They trust solid ground, avoid obvious hazards, and step where others have stepped. The Step Snare exploited that predictability perfectly. Even without weapons, those fighters had something more valuable: psychological dominance. They could shape fear out of dirt and wood. That's strategy on another level. When the war ended, most of these designs were declared inhumane and removed from official doctrine. But the mindset behind them, the art of turning limitation into strategy, never went away. In fact, it evolved. Cold War survival manuals began teaching terrain denial and environmental defense. These were sanitized versions of the same principles. Instead of traps that maimed, the focus shifted to barriers, alarms, and control of movement. The idea was to make terrain work for you, not against your opponent. Even modern disaster teams unknowingly use the Step Snare's inverted logic. They study unstable ground, identify safe paths, and guide people through zones of danger. It's the same principle, just reversed. The line between a deadly ambush and a life-saving pathway is intent. The ethical evolution of fieldcraft. Now, what makes the Step Snare so fascinating isn't really the violence, but rather it's the intelligence behind it. It proved, time and again, that the most powerful weapon isn't firepower, it's understanding human behavior. The resistance fighters who built them didn't have radar, drones, or night vision. Nope, they had observation, resourcefulness, and, honestly, an intimate connection with the land. And that's the real lesson here. Whether you're studying survivalism, home defense, or just fascinated by the psychology of war, the takeaway is universal. Control the terrain, and you control the situation. For modern-day homesteaders or off-grid enthusiasts, that doesn't mean setting traps. It means designing environments that inform, alert, and protect. Think about it. A gravel path that crunches underfoot. Dry leaves that betray a silent approach. Lighting that funnels movement into visible zones. It's the same mindset. Awareness over aggression. Why history tried to forget. After 1945, governments didn't just ban the Step Snare, they really tried to erase it altogether. Manuals were edited, diagrams vanished. Even discussions about so-called non-explosive ambush mechanisms were classified as restricted use. The reasoning was clear enough. Too easy to replicate, too horrifying to justify. But while the weapon disappeared, its philosophy endured. Veterans who had used or seen such traps quietly passed on the lessons of patience, deception, and environmental control. That thinking shaped everything from Cold War defense strategies to modern wilderness training. It's kind of poetic in a way. A weapon once built to harm evolved into knowledge that now helps people survive. The legacy that still shapes survival. Today, the Step Snare exists only as a ghost of history, a forgotten engineering marvel that proves just how far human ingenuity can go when survival is on the line. It reminds us that war isn't just fought with bullets or bombs. Sometimes it's fought with ideas, instincts, and a bit of dirt under your boots. The next time you walk through a forest trail or step on soft earth, remember, there was a time when that ground was a weapon. And in that eerie silence between step and collapse, entire battles were won, not with firepower, but with fear. So, if you want to keep uncovering the hidden stories, the erased tactics, and the secret technologies that shaped history's most forgotten front lines, subscribe to the Forgotten War Fronts. Because what's buried isn't always gone. Sometimes it's just waiting to be unearthed.